The year was 2785, and humanity had survived the brutal aftermath of the Proxima Fallen campaign. The galaxy was in shambles, a fractured chessboard of species fighting for resources across star systems. In this post-Reconnection Alliance era, interstellar conflicts had escalated beyond imagination. Territory disputes had evolved into resource wars, and resource wars had transformed into existential battles. Combat medicine had progressed dramatically too. Most battlefield medical procedures relied on automated drones, quantum reconstructors, and sophisticated AI surgical units. The Mobile Field Hospital 7 represented the pinnacle of emergency care technology, with its ability to perform thousands of complex procedures simultaneously through networked medical bots. Yet, in the middle of this mechanized healing landscape, stood Lieutenant Elena Red Hand Marsh, an Earth combat medic with a reputation that spread fear across enemy ranks. Unlike her colleagues who embraced fully automated surgical solutions, Elena carried something peculiar, an old-fashioned medkit. The worn leather case contained a curious assortment of tools, some military-grade, others clearly repurposed from civilian equipment. What made her truly remarkable and terrifying to enemies was her habit of working with blood still fresh on her hands. While most modern medics operated in sterile fields generated by nanite clouds, Elena's hands were often stained crimson from her previous patient when she moved to the next. Among the opposing forces, Deputy Strategist Korean of the Thraxian Command had issued multiple retreat orders specifically because of the Earth Doctor. His military record showed a pattern of tactical withdrawals that coincided perfectly with Elena's battlefield appearances. The Thraxian military leadership was beginning to question his judgment, but Korean insisted that the protocol was necessary. The ruined planet of Durix IV stood as a testament to the ferocity of recent conflicts. Once a mining colony, now a graveyard of crashed ships and demolished outposts. Its atmosphere was thick with particulate matter from orbital bombardments, giving the landscape a perpetual gray haze. This was where Protocol D-23B would be tested to its limits. The inciting incident occurred during a routine engagement on Durix IV. A Thraxian battalion had suffered heavy casualties after a failed orbital drop. The surviving troops, mostly elite commandos, regrouped and targeted a human field hospital, a standard tactic to cripple enemy forces. As they prepared to launch their final assault on the medical outpost, a figure emerged from a nearby trench. Lieutenant Elena Marsh, her combat fatigue splattered with blood, was racing across the battlefield, carrying her vintage medkit. She threw it onto a stretcher before diving into the makeshift operating area. "Watch this," she muttered, grabbing a tank chain from a destroyed vehicle. She looped the heavy metal links around a soldier's bleeding leg, creating an improvised tourniquet that stopped the hemorrhaging instantly. Without pausing, she connected hydraulic tubing from a downed mech suit to serve as temporary vascular conduits. The Thraxian troops watching through thermal scopes suddenly fell silent on their comm channel. Their vital signs showed a dramatic shift: elevated heart rates, adrenaline spikes, cortisol floods. Military psychologists would later name this phenomenon medic-induced stress response, MISR. Deputy Strategist Korean received the panicked message from his forward commanders. "Red-handed human medic sighted, implementing Protocol D-23B immediately." Without hesitation, he authorized the full withdrawal of all Thraxian forces from the sector. The incident at Sector 12 came next. 3 weeks after the initial Durix IV encounter, Elena was leading a small medical team through devastated terrain. The landscape was littered with broken war machines and impact craters, making transport nearly impossible. They moved on foot, carrying critical supplies, when plasma fire erupted from a concealed Hagaxian position. Elena didn't hesitate. She slid down into a bomb crater where several human soldiers had taken cover. One was already unconscious from a chest wound, while another clutched a mangled arm. "I've got you," Elena said, popping open her medkit. She withdrew metallic exofabric tape, a field surgery tool originally designed for emergency hull repairs on spacecraft. The wounded Hycan soldier, an allied species with a notoriously complex cardiovascular system, watched in astonishment as Elena used the tape to realign his broken bone. "This is unconventional," she admitted, "but effective." She then turned to what appeared to be an old coffee machine she'd salvaged from a command post. With a few modifications, she had converted it into a temporary blood filtration system. The wounded soldiers exchanged looks of disbelief as she connected it to the most severely injured man. A Hygaxian scout, witnessing this through long-range optics, immediately transmitted, "Earth Doctor with blood-covered hands using primitive tools, initiating Escape Protocol 7C." Within minutes, all enemy forces in the sector had disengaged, abandoning advantageous positions and leaving behind valuable equipment. Intelligence reports later revealed that the mere mention of the Earth Doctor with hands still bloody was enough to trigger automatic retreat protocols across several enemy species. The psychological impact of Elena's methods had transcended tactical considerations. The Sleet Canyon operation demonstrated this effect most dramatically. In the ice-covered ravine, temperatures plunged below levels most humanoid species could survive. Elena's medical team was supporting an Arcath sniper unit that had been caught in a cold energy storm. The specialized weapons the Arcath carried made them high-value targets, but also extremely vulnerable to temperature fluctuations. Elena pushed the squad into a defensible position while she attended to frostbitten tissues and hypothermic shock. Her hands were already covered in a pinkish film, a mixture of blood and the special warming gel she'd applied to earlier patients. "We need heat," she announced, extracting 2 damaged laser rifles from her pack. With remarkable ingenuity, she reconfigured their power cells to create a controlled thermal reaction. Using crystals harvested from a nearby ice mine, she amplified the heat output and began the delicate process of tissue regeneration. An Arcath commander observing from a ridge watched as Elena meticulously repaired vascular damage, her blood-soaked armor reflecting the eerie blue light of the canyon. When she looked up and calmly said, "I can work with this," the commander abandoned the planned biological weapon deployment. Within minutes, the entire Arcath strike force had retreated, despite their overwhelming numerical advantage. The Starfall ballistic network collapse further cemented Elena's reputation. The orbital defense grid had suffered catastrophic damage during an attack, trapping both human and Hyxian personnel inside the satellite control stations. With life support failing, Elena led a specialized medical team into the complex. The chief ballistics officer, a Hyxian commander, was suffering from rapid decompression injuries. Elena borrowed parts from a ballistic targeting filter to create an emergency respirator. She proposed using fragments from old interception sensors as temporary shields for damaged tissue, while repurposing locking fabric for bandages. As she worked with the sensor panel, her hands covered in cloudy lactic solution, she glanced up at an enemy sensor eye that had locked onto her position. The response was immediate. The Allied invasion force withdrew completely. Their tactical analysis simply stated, "This doctor hasn't stopped working yet." A pattern emerged across the galaxy. The mere sight of medical personnel in blue-white uniforms with Red Cross symbols, especially those with visible blood traces, was enough to trigger Protocol 14-2B, unconditional withdrawal. Enemy commanders reported experiencing immediate panic attacks when they heard someone shout, "Hand me that medkit!" The white and red colors of medical uniforms took on mythical significance. White represented hope and healing, while red signified sacrifice and the blood price of battlefield medicine. Together, they formed what enemy forces called the white-red glow, a visual trigger for retreat. The decisive battle on Emberia 9 brought these psychological warfare dynamics to their culmination. The Galactic Alliance had gathered formidable forces, including specialized Medkit hunters, specifically trained to prevent Elena from reaching the front lines. The planet's semi-desert volcanic landscape provided the perfect backdrop for the confrontation. Red sand covered everything, with rivers of lava flowing beneath the surface. Elena found herself trapped in a level 9 bunker, severely wounded after treating a Hyken major. Her hands were saturated with blood, both her own and her patient's. As she was losing consciousness from blood loss, Elena made a desperate decision. She created a temporary abdominal surgical field using a thermocore battery and nanofiber adhesive to suture a Hixian soldier's intestinal wound. The procedure was radical, even by her standards, connecting living tissue to energy-absorbing materials to create a biological circuit that accelerated healing. Plasma fire and explosions surrounded the bunker as the Medkit hunters closed in. Elena completed the final suture and looked up, her hands bright crimson, whispering, "I won't let you die." The sight was transmitted to the enemy command network, triggering an immediate mass retreat. Despite their overwhelming advantage, the Medkit hunters fled, abandoning their mission entirely. The aftermath was immediate and far-reaching. Rumors spread across the galaxy about how Elena saved a Hixian major with plasma grenades exploding mere feet away. Protocol 14-2B was updated with an additional clause. If human medical personnel with blood-stained hands appear, withdraw before they complete the sentence. I have an idea. The Hixian leadership began seriously examining ways to improve battlefield medicine, along the lines of what they termed human probable but universally impossible HPUI techniques. Korean's unit withdrew to deep space, with most soldiers requiring extended psychological rehabilitation from MISR syndrome. Interstellar organizations responded dramatically. The Galactic Medical Council established a subcommittee on non-logical medical research. The Hagaxian, Draconid, and Arcath coalition began prioritizing medic avoidance tactics in their military training programs. When Elena returned to Earth, she received the prestigious Étoile Rouge, Red Star Medal, for developing 37 new battlefield biomedical procedures. She told reporters simply, "The universe hasn't seen anything yet." Enemy commanders added Elena's name to the Hells of Medicine, a list of individuals whose mere mention was enough to demoralize troops. Wherever Elena appeared, it signaled a new generation of tactics, where healing had become the scariest weapon. As conflict continued to rage across the stars, a curious phenomenon emerged. Enemy soldiers began surrendering immediately upon seeing medkits, sometimes shouting, "I yield to the Red Hands!" Medical teams strategically displayed blood-stained gloves on their vehicles, creating a psychological deterrent more effective than any weapon system. The legend of Lieutenant Elena Red Hand Marsh had transcended tactical reality to become something more profound, a reminder that in the vastness of space, with all its technological wonders, the most terrifying force remained the human will to save lives against impossible odds. Deputy Strategist Korean sat in his meditation chamber aboard the Thraxian command vessel, reviewing footage of his most recent defeat. On the holographic display, Lieutenant Elena Marsh moved with furious determination through a battlefield on Durix 4, her medkit swinging from her shoulder as she dodged enemy fire. "She defies logic," Korean muttered to his senior staff. "Our intel suggested it would take a minimum of 6 minutes for any medic to reach the wounded in that sector. She did it in 3, through active plasma fire." His tactical coordinator, Vexmarin, pointed to the footage. "Look at her hands, sir, already covered in blood from previous patients. According to our psychology unit, this visual trigger is what causes our troops to experience combat paralysis." Korean nodded slowly. "It's not just the blood. It's what it represents, that she's already saved others under impossible conditions, and that we cannot stop her from doing so again." The meeting was interrupted by an urgent communication. A new engagement had begun in the Nerith system. Human forces had deployed, and field reports indicated Lieutenant Marsh had been spotted near the front lines. Implement Protocol D-23B, Korean ordered without hesitation. Full withdrawal from all sectors where she's been sighted. His second-in-command protested, "Sir, we outnumber them 10-1 in that region. Our heavy armor division." "Means nothing," Korean interrupted. "I've seen her turn a coffee machine into a dialysis unit. Do you think tanks will stop her? Execute the withdrawal immediately." The command was transmitted, and across the battlefield, Thraxian forces began their orderly retreat, observing from a forward position. Elena Marsh watched in confusion as the enemy abandoned their advance. She glanced down at her blood-stained hands and smiled grimly. Whatever was happening, it gave her more time to save lives. In the weeks that followed, Elena's medical team responded to emergencies across 3 star systems. Each time, the pattern repeated. Enemy forces withdrew upon confirming her presence. Galactic military intelligence began intentionally leaking her deployment locations, using her reputation as a psychological weapon. During a rare moment of downtime at orbital platform Starhaven 12, Elena met with Dr. Keller, the Chief Medical Officer for the Human Expeditionary Force. "They're using you," Elena, Keller said, studying data on a holographic display. "Command has tracked 37 enemy withdrawals in the past month, all correlating with rumors of your deployment." Elena shrugged. "As long as it means fewer casualties for us to treat. I don't care." "But don't you want to know why?" Keller asked. "What is it about you specifically that terrifies them?" Elena looked down at her hands. Though she had scrubbed them clean for the meeting, she could still see the phantom stains of countless operations. "Maybe it's because I'm willing to do what they consider impossible. In a galaxy full of high-tech medical solutions, sometimes the most frightening thing is someone who can save lives with nothing but determination and a basic medkit." Dr. Keller nodded thoughtfully. "There's more to it. Intelligence has intercepted communications from Korean's command. They've classified you as a reality-bending anomaly. They believe you violate the established laws of medical possibility." Elena laughed. "That's ridiculous. Everything I do is based on solid emergency medicine, just adapted to extreme circumstances." "To us, yes," Keller replied. "But to species with rigid hierarchical thinking like the Thraxians, your improvisation represents something deeply unsettling, an unpredictable variable in their otherwise orderly universe." The conversation was interrupted by an emergency alert. A human outpost in the Sleet Canyon region was under attack, with multiple casualties reported. Elena grabbed her medkit and ran for the transport bay, leaving Dr. Keller staring after her with a mixture of admiration and concern. The Sleet Canyon operation proved to be even more challenging than anticipated. Temperatures had dropped to near absolute zero in some parts of the ravine, creating conditions where standard medical equipment failed instantly. Elena's team was forced to adapt rapidly as they pushed through the blizzard toward the besieged outpost. "We've got Arcath snipers on the ridge," reported Specialist Zhang, Elena's communications officer. "They've pinned down our forward unit. At least 8 wounded, maybe more." Elena assessed the situation quickly. The canyon's walls were covered in a layer of reflective ice that would make any direct approach suicidal. The cold energy storm had intensified, threatening to freeze anyone exposed to it within minutes. "We go under," she decided, pointing to a narrow fissure in the ice. "That crack leads to an old mining tunnel. We can use it to bypass their line of sight." The medical team squeezed through the opening and navigated the treacherous tunnel system. When they emerged, they were directly beneath the position where the wounded soldiers had taken shelter. Elena was the first to climb up, her medkit secured tightly to her back. The scene was worse than expected. The Arcath energy weapons had caused unique tissue damage. Flesh frozen at the molecular level, while nerves remained painfully active. Conventional treatment would require specialized equipment they didn't have. "I need heat," Elena announced, surveying the wounded. Her hands were already stained with the pinkish mixture of blood and warming gel from treating hypothermia cases during their approach. She extracted 2 damaged laser rifles from her pack, weapons she had collected from the battlefield specifically for this purpose. With practiced movements, she disassembled them and reconfigured their power cells to create a controlled thermal reaction. "This is going to hurt," she warned the wounded soldiers, "but it's better than losing limbs." She applied the improvised heating device to the frozen tissues, carefully monitoring the thawing process to prevent cellular collapse. From a ridge overlooking their position, an Arcath commander observed through enhanced optics. The sight of Elena working methodically, her blood-covered armor reflecting the blue light of the canyon, triggered an immediate response. "Human medic with red hands sighted," the commander reported. "Executing withdrawal according to Protocol 7C. The Arcath forces had been preparing to deploy a specialized biological weapon designed to target human neural pathways. The weapon would have devastated not just the wounded soldiers, but all human forces in the region. Instead, they retreated, leaving behind equipment worth millions in resources. When Elena looked up and calmly said, "I can work with this," she had no idea that her words had been intercepted by Arcath surveillance and added to their list of trigger phrases associated with imminent medical impossibilities. As the medical team stabilized the wounded for evacuation, Specialist Zhang approached Elena with a puzzled expression. "Lieutenant, the enemy forces just left. They had us completely outgunned and surrounded, but they pulled out the moment you started working." Elena frowned. "That's the 3rd time this month. Something strange is happening." "Maybe they're just scared of you," Zhang suggested with a half-smile. Elena looked down at her blood-covered hands. "Maybe they should be." The incident at the Starfall Ballistic Network further reinforced the growing mythology around Elena. The orbital defense grid had been critically damaged during an enemy attack, leaving both human and Hixian personnel trapped inside the satellite control stations as life support systems failed. Elena led a specialized medical team on a high-risk insertion mission. Using retrofitted military shuttles, they docked with the damaged control hub despite the debris field surrounding it. The interior of the station was a chaos of twisted metal and exposed circuitry, with atmosphere venting from multiple breaches. The chief ballistics officer, a Hixian commander, had suffered severe decompression injuries. His unique physiology made conventional treatment impossible. Hixian cellular structures collapse differently under pressure changes than human tissues. "He has minutes at most," said the station's surviving medical officer, a junior technician clearly overwhelmed by the situation. Elena assessed the commander quickly, noting the distinctive purple discoloration of his respiratory membranes. "I need something to generate positive pressure in his thoracic cavity." She spotted a ballistic targeting filter nearby, a sophisticated piece of equipment designed to screen atmospheric variables from weapon targeting systems. With quick, decisive movements, she disassembled it and repurposed its components to create an emergency pressure regulator. "This will stabilize him temporarily," she explained to the astonished technician. "Next, we need to address the tissue damage." Elena proposed using fragments from the station's interception sensors as temporary shields for the commander's damaged tissue. The crystalline structure of the sensors was similar enough to Hixian cellular matrices to serve as a scaffold for regeneration. As she worked with the sensor panel, her hands became covered in a cloudy lactic solution, a byproduct of Hixian biological processes. She glanced up momentarily and noticed an enemy sensor eye that had locked onto her position through a breach in the station wall. The response was immediate and unexpected. The Allied invasion force that had been preparing to board the station suddenly broke off their approach. Their tactical communications, later intercepted by human intelligence, simply stated, "This doctor hasn't stopped working yet. Implement full withdrawal according to Protocol 14.2b. The enemy forces abandoned their attack entirely, despite having already breached the station's outer defenses. What should have been a devastating defeat for the human Hixian forces, instead, became a puzzling reprieve. As Elena completed the emergency procedure, the Hixian commander regained consciousness briefly. "You should not have been able to do that," he whispered, staring at her blood-covered hands with a mixture of awe and fear. "Just did what was necessary," Elena replied, checking his vital signs. "No," the commander insisted weakly. "What you did is impossible. Our medical doctrine explicitly states that injuries like mine are fatal without quantum reconstruction technology." Elena shrugged. "Sometimes the doctrines are wrong." The incident was reported throughout Allied and enemy communications networks, further enhancing the mystique surrounding the Earth Doctor with the bloody hands. Intelligence analysts noted a significant change in enemy behavior. Units now retreated preemptively from sectors where Elena was rumored to be deployed, without even engaging Allied forces. A pattern emerged across the galaxy. The mere sight of medical personnel in blue-white uniforms with Red Cross symbols, especially those with visible blood traces, was enough to trigger immediate withdrawals. Enemy commanders reported experiencing instant panic attacks when they heard phrases like, "Hand me that medkit," or "I have an idea," spoken by medical personnel. The psychological effect had become a tactical advantage that military strategists were eager to exploit. Elena was called to a high-level briefing at Galactic Command Headquarters, where she found herself facing a panel of senior officers. Admiral Vargas, the head of military operations, spoke first. "Lieutenant Marsh, are you aware that your methods have become a significant strategic asset?" Elena shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "I've heard rumors, sir, but my focus remains on saving lives, not tactical advantages." "Of course," the Admiral nodded. "But we cannot ignore the fact that enemy forces are now retreating from areas where you are deployed, often without firing a shot. Our analysts estimate that your presence has prevented thousands of casualties on both sides." "With all due respect, sir," Elena replied, "I'm just doing my job. If the enemy chooses to retreat because of that, it's their decision." A civilian consultant, seated beside the Admiral, leaned forward. "Lieutenant, we've been studying the psychological impact of your battlefield medicine. The phenomenon has been named medic-induced stress response. Enemy forces exhibit symptoms similar to extreme phobic reactions when confronted with evidence of your work." Elena frowned. "You mean they're afraid of medics?" "Not just any medics," the consultant clarified. "Specifically, human medics who demonstrate improvisation capabilities beyond what other species consider possible. Your blood-stained hands have become a symbol, a visual trigger that represents unpredictable innovation. To hierarchical species like the Thraxians or the Arcath, this represents a fundamental threat to their worldview." Admiral Vargas interjected. "We want to formalize this advantage. Operation Red Hand would deploy medical teams strategically, emphasizing visible signs of recent treatment activities." Elena stood abruptly. "You want to use medical personnel as psychological weapons? That violates everything we stand for. We're healers, not instruments of fear." "You misunderstand," the Admiral replied calmly. "We're not asking you to do anything different. Continue saving lives exactly as you have been. We're simply acknowledging the reality that your presence affects enemy decision-making and planning accordingly." The meeting ended without resolution, but the military command had already begun implementing elements of Operation Red Hand. Medical teams were deployed with greater visibility, often positioned where enemy reconnaissance could observe their activities. The white-red color scheme of medical uniforms was emphasized, and teams were instructed to maintain visible evidence of their work. Blood-stained gloves left deliberately in sight, medkits prominently displayed. Elena returned to her duties with growing unease about how her methods were being weaponized. Yet, she couldn't deny the results. Casualty rates had dropped dramatically as enemy forces increasingly chose to withdraw, rather than engage in areas with visible medical activity. The decisive confrontation came on Emberia 9, a contested planet in a strategic star system. The Galactic Alliance had gathered formidable forces to secure the planet, but intelligence reports indicated that the enemy coalition had developed countermeasures, specialized Medkit hunters, specifically trained to target and eliminate medical personnel before they could trigger the now famous retreat response. Emberia's semi-desert volcanic landscape provided the perfect backdrop for the confrontation. Red sand covered everything, with rivers of lava flowing beneath the surface. The atmospheric conditions created a perpetual haze that limited visibility and complicated both combat and medical operations. Elena's unit was deployed to support the main assault force. They established a forward medical station in an abandoned mining facility, converting the industrial equipment into makeshift medical devices with characteristic ingenuity. The battle began with a massive enemy bombardment that caught the Alliance forces by surprise. The forward elements were cut off, with heavy casualties reported across all sectors. Elena's medical team was forced to advance directly into the combat zone to reach the wounded. Medkit hunters reported in Sector 7. Specialist Zhang warned as they loaded supplies onto their transport. They're specifically targeting medical personnel. Elena nodded grimly. Then we avoid Sector 7. We'll approach through the lava tubes. They won't expect that. The journey through the underground lava channels was harrowing. Toxic gases seeped from the walls, and the heat was nearly unbearable. When they finally emerged near the position of the trapped Alliance forces, they found themselves behind enemy lines. A Hycan major was coordinating the defense of a small outpost, where dozens of wounded soldiers had taken shelter. When he saw Elena's team approaching, his mandibles clicked in what passed for a Hycan expression of relief. "The situation is critical," he reported. "We have 23 severe casualties, including 4 with internal injuries that our field kits can't handle." Elena was already assessing the wounded, her hands quickly becoming stained with blood from multiple species as she moved from patient to patient. The most serious case was a Hixian soldier with extensive abdominal trauma that had ruptured several of his auxiliary organs. "He needs surgery immediately," she decided. "Prep him while I set up." As Elena began to establish a sterile field, the outpost came under heavy fire. A plasma bolt penetrated the defensive perimeter, striking her directly. The impact threw her across the room and left a smoking hole in her medical armor. The Hycan major rushed to her side. "Lieutenant, are you all right?" Elena struggled to her feet, blood, her own this time, flowing freely from the wound. "I'm still breathing," she gasped. "That's enough to work with." Despite her injury, she returned to the Hixian patient, whose condition was deteriorating rapidly. With shaking hands, she created a temporary abdominal surgical field using a thermocore battery and nanofiber adhesive. "This is unorthodox," she admitted to the major, who was assisting her. "But conventional approaches won't work in time." She began a radical procedure, connecting living tissue to energy-absorbing materials to create a biological circuit that accelerated healing. The technique violated several established medical protocols, but Elena had seen it work in laboratory conditions. "Hand me that medkit," she instructed the major, her voice growing weaker as she fought against her own blood loss. Outside, the medkit hunters had located the outpost and were closing in. Their specialized equipment detected the distinctive energy signatures of human medical technology. They communicated in encrypted bursts, coordinating their assault to neutralize the medical team before they could complete their work. Plasma fire and explosions surrounded the bunker as the hunters breached the outer defenses. Elena completed the final suture on the Hixian soldier and looked up, her hands bright crimson with mixed blood. "I won't let you die," she whispered, as much to herself as to her patient. The lead hunter reached the entrance to the surgical area, weapon raised, and froze. Through his tactical visor, he saw Elena standing there, hands covered in blood, a determined expression on her face despite her obvious injuries. The sight triggered the very response his training was supposed to prevent. "Red-handed medic," he transmitted involuntarily, implementing Protocol 14-2B. The withdrawal was immediate and chaotic. Despite their overwhelming advantage, the Medkit hunters fled, abandoning their mission entirely. The command network was flooded with panicked reports about impossible medical procedures and the red-handed one. Elena collapsed shortly afterward, her own injuries finally overwhelming her. She awoke 3 days later in a recovery pod aboard the orbital platform Starhaven 12, with Admiral Vargas himself waiting beside her bed. "You've done it again, Lieutenant," he said with undisguised admiration. "The enemy coalition has requested armistice talks. Your little performance on Emberia 9 broke their will to continue the campaign." Elena struggled to sit up. "The patients, did they survive?" "All of them," Vargas confirmed, "including the Hixian with the abdominal trauma. Our medical research team is still trying to understand exactly how your procedure worked. By all conventional understanding, it shouldn't have been possible." "Sometimes conventional understanding needs updating," Elena replied simply. The aftermath of the Emberia 9 incident was immediate and far-reaching. Rumors spread across the galaxy about how Elena saved a Hixian major with plasma grenades exploding mere feet away. Protocol 14-2B was updated with an additional clause. If human medical personnel with blood-stained hands appear, withdraw before they complete the sentence. I have an idea. The Hixian leadership began seriously examining ways to improve battlefield medicine along the lines of what they termed human probable but universally impossible HPUI techniques. Deputy Strategist Korean's unit withdrew to deep space, with most soldiers requiring extended psychological rehabilitation from MISR syndrome. Interstellar organizations responded dramatically. The Galactic Medical Council established a subcommittee on non-logical medical research, specifically to study and potentially replicate Elena's methods. The Hegaxian, Draconid, and Arcath Coalition began prioritizing medic avoidance tactics in their military training programs. When Elena finally returned to Earth after 18 months of continuous deployment, she received the prestigious Étoile Rouge, Red Star Medal, for developing 37 new battlefield biomedical procedures. At the ceremony, a reporter asked her about the enemy's apparent fear of human medics. "Medicine isn't about fear," Elena responded. "It's about hope, the belief that no matter how dire the circumstances, we can find a way to preserve life. If our enemies retreat because they've seen that determination in action, perhaps they understand more than we give them credit for." Then she added, with a slight smile, "The universe hasn't seen anything yet." Enemy commanders added Elena's name to the Hells of Medicine, a list of individuals whose mere mention was enough to demoralize troops. Wherever Elena appeared, it signaled a new generation of tactics where healing had become the scariest weapon. As conflict continued to rage across the stars, a curious phenomenon emerged. Enemy soldiers began surrendering immediately upon seeing medkits, sometimes shouting, "I yield to the Red Hands!" Medical teams strategically displayed blood-stained gloves on their vehicles, creating a psychological deterrent more effective than any weapon system. In the years that followed, Elena's methods were studied and adopted throughout human space and beyond. The Galactic Medical Council eventually recognized the legitimacy of many of her improvised techniques, standardizing what had once been considered impossible. Deputy Strategist Korean never returned to active service. He instead wrote a controversial military treatise titled The Psychological Weapon of Healing, which became required reading at Thraxian military academies. In it, he argued that the true power of human battlefield medicine lay not in technology, but in psychological impact, the unshakable determination to save lives, regardless of circumstances. The legend of Lieutenant Elena Red Hand Marsh had transcended tactical reality to become something more profound, a reminder that in the vastness of space, with all its technological wonders, the most terrifying force remained the human will to save lives against impossible odds. On the fringes of contested space, a young medical officer unpacked her equipment at a new outpost. Among the advanced medical technology, she placed a simple, leather-bound medkit, a replica of Elena's famous one. When her commanding officer questioned its presence among the state-of-the-art equipment, she simply replied, "Some problems require unconventional solutions." She flexed her fingers, imagining them stained with the blood of patients not yet treated, challenges not yet overcome. The universe was vast and full of suffering, but also full of possibilities, especially for those willing to look beyond established limitations. In the darkness of space, enemy vessels adjusted their courses to avoid sectors with reported medical activity. Their tactical computers automatically calculated retreat vectors at the first sign of a human in medical blue with traces of red. And somewhere, Lieutenant Elena Red Hand Marsh continued her work, saving lives one impossible procedure at a time. The white-red glow of medical hope had become the most effective deterrent in the galaxy, not because it destroyed, but because it created something that transcended conflict itself, the determination to preserve life, whatever the cost. As Elena had often said during her operations, "I can work with this." And across the stars, enemies fled rather than test that simple, terrifying truth.